They took everything from her until the Mafia boss took her and gave it all back. It ended on a Tuesday. The sky over Brenton Hills was an optimistic, cloudless blue that felt like a personal insult. Clara Donnelly sat in the principal's office, the same office where she'd accepted her Teacher of the Year plaque just 10 months prior. The fluorescent lights hummed, a sound she'd never noticed before, but which now drilled into her skull. On the desk between her and Principal Henderson sat a printed-out stack of screenshots. They were blurry, grainy, and utterly damning. "Clara," Henderson said, refusing to meet her eyes. He was polishing his glasses with a microfiber cloth, a nervous, repetitive gesture. The school board was unambiguous. "Given the nature of these allegations, we have to place you on immediate, unpaid administrative leave." "It's a lie," Clara said. Her voice was flat, unrecognizable. She was 29 years old, and her life was evaporating under the buzz of the office lights. "You know it's a lie, Mark. An affair with a student, it's insane. It's Thomas Kincaid," she added, the name tasting like ash. "He's behind this." Henderson flinched. Thomas Kincaid was not just a mayoral candidate. He was the town's anointed son, the man who owned the concrete plant, the construction company, and it seemed the truth. "That's a serious accusation," Henderson muttered, still rubbing his glasses. "What we have is a signed statement from the boy's parents. What we have are these messages." "They're fake," her voice cracked, rising in desperation. "He cornered me at the fall fundraiser. He was drunk. He made an advance. I told him I wasn't interested. I laughed it off. And now this is revenge." "The board considers the matter closed pending a full police investigation," he said. The official words a suit of armor against her panic. "You'll need to gather your personal effects from your classroom after school hours. Please, we don't want to disrupt the students." Disrupt the students? As if she were a gas leak. As if she hadn't spent 5 years buying coats for children whose parents forgot, staying late to tutor, building a library with her own money. She lost her job. The accusation spread through Brenton Hills like wildfire on a dry plain. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a fact by supper time. The local news blog ran her picture, her school photo, smiling and hopeful, next to a headline that screamed, "Local teacher accused of heinous moral breach." The online comments were a special kind of hell. Parents she'd had coffee with, women from her yoga class, anonymous accounts, all of them ripping her to shreds. Predator, filth. I always knew there was something off about her. By Wednesday, an eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. The laminated paper slapped against the wood in the cold November wind. Her landlord, who happened to own a concrete company bearing the Kincaid family crest, cited a moral turpitude clause in her lease. She had 48 hours. She tried to leave, to go to the bank and pull out her savings. Her car, a reliable 10-year-old sedan, was unusable. Someone had keyed "whore" across the driver's side door in deep, jagged letters. All 4 tires were flat. She walked the mile to the bank, hood pulled low, feeling the phantom weight of stares from every passing car. At the teller, the humiliation was completed. "I'm sorry, Miss Donnelly," the young woman said, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "There seems to be a hold on your accounts, a legal freeze, pending the investigation." Kincaid. He hadn't just ruined her, he had surgically dismantled her life, piece by piece, until nothing was left. She went back to her empty apartment, the eviction notice mocking her. She sat on the floor and began to call. First, legal aid. A tired voice on the other end of the line sighed. "Do you have concrete proof that Mr. Kincaid manufactured these messages? Do you have witnesses? Without evidence? Miss Donnelly, it's slander, and that's a civil suit you'll have to fund yourself. We're inundated." Click. Second, her old college roommate, Sarah, now living 2 towns over. "Clara, oh my God, I saw the article." "Sarah, it's not true. He framed me. I have nowhere to go. My money is frozen. Can I just come stay for a few days, just until I figure this out?" The silence on the line stretched, thick and toxic. "Oh, Clara, God, that's awful, but You know my kids, they're in school. My husband, his job. We can't be seen getting involved. You understand? I'm so sorry." And click, last, her estranged sister, Megan. The phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. "Meg, it's me. I'm in trouble. Real trouble. I don't have anywhere to go. They took everything. Please, Megan, call me back." The call was never returned. The harassment became physical. A rock through her apartment window that night. Eggs splattered on her door. Whispers and pointed fingers when she walked to the corner store just to buy a bottle of water with the last $12 in cash she had. She was a ghost in her own life, abandoned. On Thursday night, under the cover of darkness, Clara Donnelly packed a single backpack, a few clothes, her toothbrush, her mother's locket. She left her laptop, her teaching degree, her books. She left the ruins. She walked to the bus station on the edge of town, paid cash for a one-way ticket to the closest metropolis, Roseton, a city big enough to swallow her whole. As the bus pulled out, the diesel engine groaning, she watched the lights of Brenton Hills smear and disappear through the rain-streaked glass. She cried quietly, her shoulders shaking in the darkness of the back seat, a 29-year-old woman disappearing into the night. She arrived in Roseton at 3 a.m. in a deluge of freezing rain. The city was a canyon of dark steel and concrete, indifferent to her arrival. She had $7 left. She spent $2 on a bitter coffee at the station, just to stay warm, before asking the attendant where she could go. He pointed her toward the St. Jude's Women's Shelter. It was a run-down brick building with a flickering neon cross. The cot they gave her was thin. The blanket smelled of industrial bleach and old soup. She lay awake all night, listening to the chorus of coughing and quiet sobbing from the other women in the dark. Cavernous room. The next few days were a blur of a new, sharper kind of degradation. She tried to find work, but her name, Clara Donnelly, was now toxic. The moment a potential employer ran a background check, the mood changed. "We'll call you," they'd say, their smiles tight and false. She sold her mother's locket for $80. It bought her another week of bus fare and stale bagels. Finally, she found a temp agency that didn't ask questions, one that paid cash under the table. The job was working the coat check at the Ebony Lounge, a private, high-end club in the city's old quarter. The uniform was a cheap polyester vest. The pay was minimum wage, and the clientele was the kind of money that didn't see the help. It was perfect. She was invisible. A week into the job, she was running on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar. Her shoes, the only pair she owned, had worn through, and the constant walking on wet pavement had given her a sharp, persistent limp. The lounge was busy. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne, old leather, and whiskey. Clara was hanging up a heavy cashmere overcoat when a patron barked for his jacket. She hurried, pulling the ticket, and turned too quickly from the rack. She collided squarely with a man's chest. It was like hitting a brick wall dressed in expensive wool. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, stumbling back, her hands flying up. "I'm so sorry, sir. I wasn't looking." The man said nothing. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so sharply cut it looked more like armor than clothing. He was maybe 38 with dark hair cut short and severe, but it was his face that made her breath catch. It wasn't handsome in the classical sense. It was hard, carved from stone. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, were not looking at her face. They were scanning her, a slow, methodical assessment that took in her frayed cuffs, the exhaustion under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands, and the cheap shoes that were wet from the rain outside. She was just another piece of broken furniture. She braced for the inevitable complaint to her manager. The silence stretched. He just watched her. When he finally spoke, his voice was impossibly low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "You look like you've had the kind of month I wouldn't wish on a dog." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't pity. It was a simple, brutal statement of fact. Clara stared at him, speechless. This was Luca Moretti, though she didn't know the name, the head of a family so discreet, so powerful, that they didn't bother with the public eye. They didn't need to. They quietly ran the veins of Roseton's underground economy, the unions, the shipping, the gambling, and he was known for two things: his brutal past and an unspoken, ironclad code of justice. Before she could find her voice, the atmosphere in the club shattered. "You think you can talk to me like that?" A voice, loud and laced with alcohol, bellowed from the bar. A scuffle broke out. A small group of younger, flashy men, rivals trying to make a name, had pushed one of Luca's lieutenants. A bottle smashed. A woman screamed. Clara instinctively pressed herself back against the coat rack. Trapped, one of the rivals, shoved hard, stumbled backward, careening directly toward her. Luca moved. It wasn't fast, but it was absolute. He didn't look at her. He didn't say a word. He simply put himself between her and the chaos. One long arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her from the wall and shielding her entirely with his own body. He tucked her against his back as if she weighed nothing. He was a wall of muscle and expensive fabric, and he smelled faintly of tobacco and iron. He stared over her head at the brawl. The room went dead silent. The young men who had started the fight froze, their drunken bravado evaporating as they realized exactly who they had disturbed. "Get them out," Lucas said, his voice no louder than it had been with her. His men, silent and efficient, grabbed the rivals and dragged them toward the exit. The confrontation was over in less than 30 seconds. Luca did not release her immediately. He held her there for a beat, a solid, grounding weight against her back. Then he stepped away. The air rushed back into her lungs. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He nodded toward the back exit, the one for staff. "You should go." He walked her, not through the club, but through the swinging doors to the kitchen, past the chaos of cooks and steam, and pushed open the heavy steel door to the back alley. The rain was a cold, driving sheet. It hit her face instantly, soaking her thin hair. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling her threadbare jacket tight. She didn't look at him again. She just wanted to disappear, to get back to the shelter before curfew. She started walking, her limp more pronounced on the slick, uneven cobblestones. Luca Moretti stood in the doorway, shielded from the rain, and watched her go. He watched her hunched shoulders, her wet shoes, and the way she flinched when a car horn blared nearby. He watched her turn the corner, heading not toward the subway, but toward the industrial blocks where the shelters and flophouses were. A black sedan, long and immaculate, pulled into the alley, its engine a silent purr. The driver, Nico, got out to open the back door. Luca didn't move, his eyes fixed on the empty corner where the girl had vanished. He got into the car, the scent of the cold rain clinging to his coat. He sat in the darkness of the back seat, the leather creaking under his weight. He leaned forward, his voice quiet but carrying the unassailable weight of command. "Nico, I want to know everything about that girl. Tonight." By the time Luca Moretti sat down in his office, the manila folder was already waiting on the center of his antique mahogany desk. It sat alone, a stark, plain object in a room of dark wood, bound books, and shadows. Nico, his driver and most trusted lieutenant, stood by the window, letting the gray morning light outline his silhouette. "You were right," Nico said, his voice quiet. "She's not a city girl. The file is from Brenton Hills." Luca opened the folder. He didn't ask questions. He read. He absorbed the information with a stillness that was more menacing than any rage. He saw the name, Clara Donnelly, age 29. He saw her employment record, 5 years at Brenton Hills Elementary. Spotless. He saw the awards, Teacher of the Year, 2024. Then he saw the other file, the police report, filed just 3 weeks ago. The accusation, the screenshots of manufactured, lurid messages, and the name of the man who had orchestrated it, Thomas Kincaid. "Kincaid," Lucas said, the name a flat, dead sound in the room. "Mayoral candidate," Nico supplied. "Owns half the town, wants the other half. He made an advance at a town fundraiser. She refused him, publicly." 2 days later, These accusations surfaced. The student's family was 3 months behind on a mortgage held by one of Kincaid's shell companies. The debt was forgiven the day they signed the affidavit. Luca turned the page. He saw the eviction notice, the bank statement, showing an account frozen by court order. He didn't just push her, he buried her. Luca murmured. He closed the folder. The girl in the alley, the one with the wet hair and the haunted eyes, was not a ghost. She was a victim. "What do you want done about Kincaid?" Nico asked. Luca looked at the photo clipped to the file. It was her school picture. Bright smile, eyes full of warmth, hair tied back. It was a different person from the broken woman he'd seen limping in the rain. "Nothing," Luca said. "Not yet. I just want to know where he sleeps." He stood. "Where is she now?" "The shelter only lets them stay 3 nights. She left this morning. We tracked her to a temp agency, then to the Red Top Diner over on 8th. Luca nodded, putting on his heavy wool overcoat. "I'll drive myself." Clara had been working at the Red Top for 2 weeks. It was a different kind of hell from the shelter, but it was consistent. The pay was cash, the hours were brutal, and the smell of stale coffee and hot grease clung to her hair and clothes. She was exhausted down to the bone. Her limp was better, but her feet felt like a constant, dull ache. Tonight was busy. Truckers and late-shift factory workers crowded the booths, their voices loud over the sizzle of the flat top. She was clumsy with fatigue, her hands shaking as she balanced heavy ceramic plates. A large man in a grease-stained flannel shirt waved his empty mug at her. "Hey, waitress, I ordered these eggs over easy, not hard as a rock. And where's my coffee?" "I'm sorry. Sir, I'll get you a fresh—" "You're sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it, sweetheart." He stood up, his sudden movement knocking her off balance. She stumbled, and the plate of hash browns and bacon she was carrying tilted. It clattered to the floor, splattering grease on his boots. The diner went quiet. The man, his face flushed red with anger and cheap beer, stared at the mess. "You clumsy bitch," he spat. He lunged forward, not to hit her, but to grab her. His thick, calloused fingers wrapped around her wrist, squeezing hard. Clara cried out, a sharp intake of breath. The pain was immediate, sharp. "You're paying for that," he snarled, shoving her backward. He didn't slap her. He didn't have to. The grip and the shove were enough. "Hey, the owner," Sal shouted from behind the counter, his face a mask of irritation. "Clara, what the hell are you doing? Clean that up, now, and that's coming out of your pay. You hear me?" The man in the flannel shirt laughed, released her wrist, and sat back down. "And bring me my damn coffee." Tears of humiliation burned in Clara's eyes. She bit her lip, forcing them back. She looked at her wrist, dark purple. Angry finger marks were already blooming on her pale skin. She pulled her sleeve down, grabbed a rag and dustpan, and knelt to clean up the broken plate, her entire body trembling. 5 minutes later, the bell on the diner door jingled. The room, which had just returned to its normal level of noise, quieted again. It was a different kind of quiet, curious, wary. Luca Moretti stepped inside. He was a piece of the night sky cut into the shape of a man. His black suit, his dark hair, his imposing stillness. He absorbed all the light in the greasy, fluorescent-lit room. He didn't belong. He ignored the booths and slid onto a stool at the counter, directly in front of Clara. She approached, keeping her head down, her hands shaking. "What can I get you?" she whispered. "Coffee. Black." That voice, that low, gravelly rumble. Her head snapped up. It was him. The man from the club, the man who had shielded her. His dark eyes were fixed on her. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her wrist, where her sleeve had slipped back, revealing the fresh, violent bruise. She quickly pulled the sleeve down. Her hand trembled as she poured his coffee, spilling a small amount into the saucer. She set it down in front of him. "I'm sorry," she stammered. Luca didn't respond. He simply lifted the cup, his gaze lifting from her wrist to her eyes. He took a slow sip. He watched her. He didn't speak. He just sat, drinking his coffee, a silent, terrifying guardian at the counter. He was still sitting there an hour later when Sal told her to clock out and take the trash to the alley. Closing time was midnight. The alley behind the red top was a narrow canyon of brick, smelling of sour milk and wet cardboard. Clara shoved the heavy black bag into the dumpster, her breath pluming in the cold. "Hey." She froze. The man in the flannel shirt stepped out from behind the neighboring building's alcove. He was much drunker now, holding a bottle in a paper bag. "Figured I'd wait," he slurred, a grin splitting his face. "You and me. We got unfinished business. You cost me a good breakfast." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed up against the cold, wet brick of the diner. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want any trouble. I don't have any money." "I don't want your money," he said, taking a step toward her. He lunged, dropping the bottle. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the alley's mouth. It wasn't one shadow, it was two. And behind them, the silent, hulking shape of a black sedan, its engine off, its lights dead. The drunk man turned, confused. What the hell? It was over before he could finish the thought. It was not a fight, it was a removal. Nico and another man, both in identical dark suits, moved with a speed that was terrifying. Nico grabbed the man's outstretched arm, twisted it behind his back. The other man delivered a single, precise, open-handed strike to the side of his neck. There was no sound, just a grunt and the heavy, sickening thud as the man's body crumpled to the pavement, unconscious. Clara was hyperventilating, her hand over her mouth. The back door of the sedan opened. Luca Moretti stepped out. He looked at the man on the ground with zero interest, then at Clara. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt. "I'll walk you home," he said. It was not an offer. She was too terrified to say no. She was too terrified to do anything but nod. They walked in silence. Luca's heavy, measured footsteps next to her own hurried, limping gait. The two men in the car had vanished as silently as they appeared. They walked block after block away from the diner, toward the worst part of town, toward the flickering neon cross of the St. Jude's shelter. The realization that he knew where she lived, that this wasn't a coincidence, made the panic bubble up in her throat, choking her. She stopped on the broken pavement, halfway down the block from the shelter. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking but desperate. "What do you want from me? Are you... Did Thomas Kincaid send you?" She was backing away, her hands held up. "I don't have anything, I swear. I don't have any money. They took it all. Please, just leave me alone." Luca stopped. He stood under a flickering orange streetlight, which cast harsh shadows across the hard planes of his face. He looked at her, at the raw terror in her eyes, the same terror he'd seen in the file. The anger he felt was a cold, sharp thing, but none of it was for her. He took a half step closer, and she flinched. He stopped. "You don't have to fear me," he said. His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, but it held an absolute, unbreakable weight. Not ever. They stood at the peeling, graffiti-covered door of the shelter. The smell of bleach and despair wafted out. "I have properties," he said, looking at the building, not at her. "They need oversight, a caretaker." Clara stared at him, bewildered. Then a cold, bitter laugh escaped her. "A caretaker? Is that what you call it? I can't." She thought he was propositioning her, that this was just a different, more expensive kind of trap. "It's a large apartment," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. His gaze met hers, and there was no heat in it, no desire, just a flat, level assessment. "It's empty. It needs someone to be there. Water the plants, keep the dust settled." He looked back at the shelter door. "It pays well, and it is safe." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single, thick, cream-colored card. It had no name, just an address embossed in simple, black font. 10 o'clock tomorrow, he said. "See the place, then decide." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned, his long coat settling around him, and walked into the darkness. A moment later, the black sedan glided to the curb, opened its door for him, and disappeared. She went. Of course she went. She had $7 to her name and a bruise on her wrist that was turning a deep, sickly black. The address was a monstrous building of gray. Brutalist concrete in a revitalized industrial district, it was ugly and imposing. But the private elevator opened directly into the apartment, and Clara's breath caught. It wasn't an apartment, it was the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 2 full sides of the penthouse. Sunlight, actual warm sunlight, poured in, illuminating polished hardwood floors. It was mostly empty, but in a deliberate, minimalist way. A deep gray couch, a few chairs, and a wall. An entire wall of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with books, and a kitchen. A real kitchen, with a marble island and a stainless steel refrigerator that hummed. Luca was standing by the window, looking down at the city of Roseton. He had been waiting. "This?" she whispered, stepping out of the elevator. "You need a caretaker for this? You can stay as long as you want," he said, his back still to her. "What's the catch?" Her voice was sharp with suspicion. What do you expect?" He turned slowly. "I expect you to lock the door. I expect you to eat the food." He gestured to the kitchen, which she now saw was fully stocked. "I expect you to sleep in a bed that isn't in a room with 20 other people. There is no catch, no conditions." Nico appeared from a side door, carrying her single, pathetic backpack, which he set gently by the door before disappearing. The reality of it hit her. The quiet, the light, the safety. She walked, dazed, past Luca, through a door into a bedroom and into the attached bathroom. It was all marble and glass, bigger than her entire apartment in Brenton Hills. A stack of new, fluffy white towels sat by a deep soaking tub. She locked the door. The simple click of the deadbolt broke something deep inside her. She slid down the cool marble wall, pressing her fist to her mouth to muffle the sound. She wept. It wasn't a gentle crying, it was a full-body, racking purge of every humiliation, every moment of terror, every cold night, and every poisoned whisper of the last month. She cried for her job, for her car, for her good name, and for the fact that a dangerous stranger was the only person who had offered her a hand. Luca stood outside the bathroom door. He heard every choked sob. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there, a silent sentinel, until the sounds quieted, replaced by the ragged, exhausted sound of breathing. He waited another 5 minutes in the silence. "It's safe now," he said, his voice low, just loud enough to penetrate the heavy wood. Then he turned and left the penthouse, the elevator doors sliding shut with a soft, final thud. That night, she cooked. She had taken a bath that lasted 2 hours, washing the diner and the shelter from her skin. She found pasta, fresh tomatoes, and basil in the kitchen. She needed to do something normal, something human. He arrived just as she was draining the water. He didn't knock. He let himself in with a key, and for a second she felt a flash of fear, but he stopped in the entryway, looking at her by the stove. He seemed out of place. This was his home, but it wasn't. He took off his suit jacket, folded it carefully over the back of a chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing a dark, intricate tattoo that wrapped around his left forearm, disappearing under the sleeve. They ate at the wide kitchen island, the lights of Roseton glittering below them like a fallen constellation. The silence was thick, but not entirely uncomfortable. "The food is good," he said, after several minutes. "It's just pasta," she replied, her voice still rough from crying. A small, hesitant, almost painful smile touched her lips. "I'm a terrible caretaker. I haven't dusted anything." His eyes fixed on her mouth. He didn't smile back, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease by a fraction. "The plants look fine." The quiet settled again. She put her fork down. She had to know. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The club, the diner, this... Why are you helping me?" He stopped eating. He looked away from her, out the window, at the endless sprawl of the city. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, laced with an old, cold anger that startled her. "Because," he said, turning his dark eyes back to her, "someone should have long before me. The honesty of it, the simple, brutal truth settled in her chest. Later, after they had cleaned the few dishes, she stood by the entrance to the guest wing. He was at the counter, pouring himself a glass of water. "Good night," she said. She started to walk away, then stopped. She turned back. He was watching her, his expression guarded, still. She walked back to him. He tenses, his whole body going rigid, like a predator bracing for a threat. She was close enough to see the small, faded scar that cut through his left eyebrow. She was terrified, but she was more grateful than she was scared. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, she reached out, her fingers, trembling only slightly, gently touched the back of his hand where it rested, knuckles down on the cool marble. His skin was warm. He went absolutely, perfectly still. He didn't breathe. His eyes locked on hers, and in their depths, she saw a storm of warring emotions, confusion, shock, and something else. Something buried so deep she couldn't name it. It was charged. It was unsure. It was devastatingly emotional. She held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. "Thank you, Luca," she whispered. Realizing she must have heard Nico say his name, she pulled her hand back, the heat of his skin lingering on her fingertips. She turned and walked to her new room, her heart hammering a frantic, unsteady rhythm. Luca Moretti did not move for a long time, his eyes fixed on the back of his own hand, as if he could still feel the ghost of her touch. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and light. In the first few days, Clara lived in it like a ghost, starting at every sound, half expecting to be told she had to leave, but the days bled into a week, then two, and the quiet began to heal her. She started small. She unpacked her backpack, placing her few items of clothing in a drawer that was larger than her old dresser. She explored the kitchen, marveling at the spices, the fresh fruit that appeared every 2 days, left by someone she never saw. She found the library, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. She read. She lost herself in worlds of fiction, history, and poetry. She was a teacher with no classroom, but the books felt like coming home. The constant, thrumming knot of fear in her stomach began to loosen. She started leaving the apartment, first just to the building's lobby, then to the coffee shop on the corner. Then, for long walks along the riverfront, she wore new clothes, a simple, elegant wardrobe of jeans, sweaters, and a warm coat that had been delivered in boxes, all in her size. She'd fought him on it, but Luca was immovable. "You'll freeze," was all he'd said. "It's just a coat." Luca himself kept his distance. He was a creature of the night. He would often arrive late, long after she'd gone to bed, and she would only know he'd been there by the faint scent of tobacco and the new carton of milk in the fridge. Sometimes, though, he would be there in the early evening, sitting on the balcony, watching the city turn on its lights. He would ask her about her day, and she would tell him about the book she was reading or a strange new cafe she'd found. He was a quiet listener, his attention total. He watched her, his dark eyes cataloging the changes. He saw the way she no longer flinched when he moved too quickly. He saw the color rise in her cheeks, the light return to her eyes. Her shoulders, which had been permanently hunched in terror, were now straight. One evening, she found him in the entryway, shrugging into his heavy overcoat. "You're going out," she stated, feeling a strange twist of disappointment. He paused, one arm in his sleeve. "I have a meeting at Café Russo." "Oh," she nodded, turning back to the kitchen. "Come with me," he said. She stopped. "What?" "Café Russo. They make a cannoli that doesn't taste like sugar and lard. You should try it." It was not an order, but it wasn't quite a request. It was a statement of fact, an assumption that she would. She grabbed her coat. The Café Russo was in the old Italian district of Rosedon, a neighborhood of narrow cobblestone streets and brick row houses. The air smelled of garlic and baking bread. When Luca walked in, the entire restaurant, filled with men in dark suits eating pasta and families arguing loudly over wine, went utterly silent. A large, older man with a magnificent white mustache rushed from behind the bar, wiping his hands on his apron. "Mr. Moretti, signore, an honor. Your table is ready." Luca nodded, placing a hand on the small of Clara's back, a light, protective pressure that guided her through the parted sea of patrons. They were given a table in a quiet, curtained-off alcove. "This is," she whispered, looking around. "This is your world. It's a restaurant. Clara." Everyone stopped talking. They looked afraid of you. He took a sip of the water that had been instantly placed before him. "They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of disrespect. There's a difference." A few minutes later, a man was shown to their table. He was slick, nervous, his eyes darting to Clara and then quickly away. "Luca," the man began, his voice too loud. "Thanks for seeing me." Luca just looked at him. He didn't offer him a seat. It was a misunderstanding. The man rushed on. "The shipment, the manifests were mixed up. A simple clerical error. It won't happen again." Luca leaned forward, his voice dropping to that low, quiet rumble that made the air feel heavy. "You have worked for my family for 15 years. Sal, in 15 years. We have never had a clerical error that resulted in 10% of the product ending up in your brother-in-law's warehouse. My father overlooked your greed because you were loyal. I am not my father." The man's face went pale. "Luca, please. You will return what you took. All of it, by midnight," Luca said, "and you will add another 10% from your own pocket for the inconvenience, and then you will go work for your brother-in-law. You will not work for me again." "Luca, you can't. The union—" I am the union," Luca said. It was the simple, unadorned truth. "You are lucky you are only poor. You could be dead. Now, get out of my sight. You're bothering the lady." The man practically ran from the alcove. Clara stared at her water glass, her hands clasped in her lap. She felt cold. Luca signaled the waiter. 2 cannoli and an espresso. He looked at her. He stole from his own people. He betrayed a trust. My world has rules. He broke the most important one. "Which is?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze. "You never, ever lie to me." She realized, with a jolt, that he was talking as much to her as he had been to Sal. He was showing her his code, his strange, brutal kind of honor. She asked questions for the rest of the meal, and he answered every one. He never lied to her. He told her about his businesses, the ones on paper and the ones in the shadows. He told her how he kept the peace and how he enforced it. She should have been horrified, but she found she was fascinated in her old life. Thomas Kincaid had destroyed her with lies, all while smiling and shaking hands. In Luca's world, a lie was a death sentence, and the truth, however ugly, was the only currency. A few nights later, he found her reading on the sofa. "Put your coat on," he said. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." He took her to the most aggressively ugly building she had ever seen. It was the one from the address card he'd given her, a 20-story monolith of gray, brutalist concrete, pockmarked and stained. "You brought me to—" "A parking garage?" she asked, as he led her into a foul-smelling service elevator. "Look up," he said. The elevator doors opened, not onto a floor, but directly onto the night sky. Clara stepped out and her breath hitched. They were on the roof, but it wasn't a roof. It was a garden, a secret, sprawling oasis hidden from the world. String lights were woven through the branches of small, potted olive trees. A lush carpet of real grass covered the concrete. Wisteria vines climbed a high trellis, and in the center a small stone fountain bubbled quietly. The city of Rosaton glittered around them, 1,000 feet below. But up here, under the sweep of the stars, it was silent. "Luca," she breathed. "It's beautiful." "My mother built it," he said, his voice softer. "She hated the city. She said she needed a place to breathe. No one comes up here but me." He led her to a small bench near the edge, where a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses were waiting. He poured for both of them. They sat in a comfortable silence, sharing the wine, the stars, and the quiet. "My childhood," Luca said, swirling the wine in his glass, "was loud. Always arguments, always men shouting in my father's office. This was the only quiet place." "Mine was quiet, too," Clara offered. "After my mom died, my dad, he just sort of checked out, and my sister—" She just wanted to get away. I was mostly alone, with my books. She smiled. A small, sad gesture. I guess that's why I became a teacher. I didn't want any kid to feel that alone. The conversation turned, as it often does in the dark, to the things that mark you. That scar, she said, her voice soft. She reached out, her fingers hovering, but not touching. The small, faded white line through his left eyebrow. What's it from? He didn't flinch from her near touch. A lesson. My first one. A lesson. I was 16. I thought I knew more than my father. I went to a meeting I wasn't invited to. The man I was meeting. He didn't like my father. He used a broken bottle. Taught me not to be arrogant and not to go anywhere without my men. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the starlight. What about your scars? She instinctively touched her wrist, where the faint, yellowing shadow of the drunk's grip remained. They're not like yours. They fade. Not all of them, he said, his voice knowing. Clara looked away, out at the endless lights. No, she whispered, the worst part of Brenton Hills. It wasn't losing my job. It wasn't the eviction or the car or even the money. She took a shaky breath. It was how easy it was, how fast everyone believed it. My friends, the principal, the parents I worked with for years. It was like I was nothing, like I was disposable. Her voice cracked on the last word. One lie, and 5 years of my life, my work, my reputation. It was just gone. That's the scar. Knowing you mean that little. Knowing you're that disposable. Luca was silent for a long time. He set his wineglass down on the stone ledge with a heavy, definitive click. I know that scar, he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. I have one just like it, but mine has a name. What do you mean? When I was 25, my father was sick. I was running things. I brought someone in, a man from the outside, smart, good with numbers. I trusted him. I liked him. I treated him like a brother. He saw everything, our books, our roots, our contacts. He stared into the darkness, but he was seeing the past. He sold us out to a rival, not for money, for position. The attack came on a Sunday. My father, he never recovered from the shock. My younger brother, he was caught in the crossfire. Clara put her hand over her mouth. Luca, it cost me everything, he said. The words hollowed out. It cost me my family. It taught me trust is a luxury you can't afford. It's a loaded gun you hand to someone, pointed at your own head. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were dark with a pain so old and deep it stunned her. I have never trusted anyone like that again, until you. The air between them crackled. His confession hung in the night, raw and terrifying. Luca, she whispered, her heart aching for him, for herself. He looked at her mouth. She watched his gaze drop, and her breath caught. He leaned in, so slowly it was almost painful. It was a question. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of profound, hesitant discovery. It was slow, trembling, charged with all the unspoken words, all the shared pain. His lips were soft, hesitant, testing. His hand came up, not to grab her, but to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking the skin below her ear. She could feel the slight tremor in his fingers, the unsteadiness in a man who was never unsteady. He broke the kiss. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His eyes were closed, his breath ragged. Clara, he rasped, his voice thick with a fear she had never heard from him. I will break you. I'm not a good man. I will hurt you. She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who was terrified. He was afraid of hurting her. He, who broke men for a living. You won't, she whispered. And she leaned in again. This time, it was different. It was her choice, her reaching for him. The kiss was deeper, a slow, unhurried exploration. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her closer, not with force, but with a desperate, gentle reverence. He kissed her like she was the first good thing he had touched in a decade. There was no dominance. There was only connection. He lifted her easily, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his neck, never breaking the kiss. He carried her back to the penthouse, the elevator ride a blur of soft, open-mouthed kisses and tangled hands. He laid her on his bed, in his room, a stark, dark space that smelled of him. The city lights were the only illumination. He pulled back, his eyes scanning her face, searching for any sign of fear. She met his gaze, holding it, letting him see the vulnerability, the want, and the absolute trust she was placing in him. It was a surrender, not to him, but to the moment, to the safety she felt in his arms. He undressed her slowly, his movements tender, unhurried. His calloused fingertips traced the line of her collarbone, his touch light, as if he were memorizing her. She undid the buttons of his shirt, her own hands trembling, sliding the fabric off his broad shoulders, revealing the dark tattoo that snaked down his arm. Their lovemaking was as quiet and profound as the rooftop garden. It was a silent conversation. It was in the way his eyes never left hers, the way his breath hitched when she touched the scar on his eyebrow. It was in the way he held her, his body shielding hers, a physical promise of protection. It was in the way she finally let go, her body arching toward his in a silent, emotional release that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with being seen. It was a tender, fragile, and desperate claiming, and when it was over, he held her, his arms locked around her, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in as if she were air. The next morning, Clara woke up alone in a vast, sun-drenched bed. She was wearing one of his black t-shirts. It enveloped her, smelling of him, tobacco, soap, and something uniquely male. She padded out of the bedroom, onto the massive balcony. Luca was there, at the far end, leaning against the railing. He was dressed in a fresh suit, already armored for the day. He was smoking, a thin stream of gray rising into the bright morning air. He looked exactly as he had the first night she saw him, hard, remote, untouchable. He was watching the city below, his city, his expression carved from stone. He didn't hear her. She watched him, this man who had been so impossibly tender, so vulnerable, just hours before. And she saw the truth. He was two men, the gentle, wounded soul who had shared his scars, and the feared, ruthless boss who broke liars in his own restaurant. She stood in the sunlight, wrapped in his shirt, and a terrifying, unshakable realization settled over her. She was falling in love with a man everyone in Roseton feared. Later that afternoon, Luca Moretti sat in his real office, the one above the Café Russo. Nico stood opposite his desk. "You wanted to know about Kincaid," Nico said. Luca tapped his finger on the polished wood. He thought of Clara's words, disposable. He thought of the bruises on her wrist and the tremor in his own hands when he had touched her. "No," Luca said, his voice cold and flat. "I'm done knowing. I want to dismantle him. I want you to find every piece of dirt, every illegal contract, every bribe he's ever taken. I want to know where he hides his money. I want to know where he sleeps, and I want to know what he fears." He looked up at Nico, his eyes like black ice. "Thomas Kincaid took everything from her. I'm going to take everything from him." Luca Moretti's network moved with the silent, devastating efficiency of a deep ocean current. While Clara rebuilt her days with books and sunlight in Roseton, Luca's men, led by Nico, descended on Brenton Hills like ghosts. They didn't knock on doors, they slid through cracks. They bought drinks for disgruntled Kincaid campaign staffers, planted listening devices, and followed money trails that were meant to be invisible. A week later, Luca laid a thin, black laptop on the penthouse's marble island. Clara looked up from the book she was reading. "It's done," he said. He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a neat, horrifying summary. "They hacked the school's email server," Luca said, his voice a flat, cold monotone. He pointed to a file. "They found a deleted draft of the original message written on Kincaid's personal IP address 2 days before the student supposedly sent it." He clicked again, a financial ledger. The student, his name is Kyle Harding, his family's mortgage, the one we knew about, was just the start. Kincaid's community fund also paid a 5-figure sum into a trust for Kyle's college education. Activated the day after you were fired. He clicked a third time. An audio file. It was a recording of a phone call between Kincaid and the editor of the Brenton Hills blog. The editor was agreeing to fast-track the story and manage the comments section in exchange for exclusive access to the new mayor's office. It was all there. Every lie, every bribe, every digital footprint. It was a complete systematic execution of her life, laid bare in 3 files. Clara stared at the screen, her blood running cold. She felt a wave of nausea, but also a dark, unfamiliar surge of pure, white-hot anger. Luca closed the laptop. The quiet click echoed in the room. "It's finished, Clara," he said. He moved to stand in front of her, his presence a solid wall between her and the world. "I have the originals. I have copies buried so deep no one will ever find them. I can make this all go away. I can give this to a reporter in New York. Someone Kincaid can't touch. His career will be over by morning. You never have to see his face again. You don't have to do anything." She looked up at him, at this powerful man who was offering to solve her problems with a single phone call. He was offering her an ending. But it wasn't her ending. "No," she said. He stilled. "No, no," she said again, her voice stronger. She stood up, forcing herself to meet his dark, intense gaze. "He did this to me. He stood in my town, in my school, and he called me a liar. He turned my friends against me. He made me disposable." She used the word she had used on the rooftop, and she felt the same sting. "If I let you handle this," she continued, her hands clenching into fists at her sides, "then I'm still that girl, the one who runs, the one who hides." She took a shaky breath, the fire in her chest burning away the last of her fear. "I want justice, Luca. Not just revenge. I want to clear my name. I want to go back." "Clara," he started, his voice a low warning. "Brenton Hills is his town. You are not safe there. I wasn't safe there before." "But I am now," she said, the conviction in her voice surprising them both. "You said it yourself. I don't walk alone anymore, unless you won't go with me." A flicker of something, pride, respect, and a deep, fierce protectiveness moved in his eyes. He studied her for a long moment. This woman who had been shattered and was now reforming herself into something stronger, something sharper. "Pack a bag," he said, his voice rough. "We leave in an hour." He made the preparations with the precision of a general planning an invasion. It was not just the two of them. A black SUV, identical to Luca's, would follow them, carrying Nico and 2 other men. They would be armed, not with guns, but with high-frequency scanners, hidden cameras, and legal documents prepared by a shark of a lawyer from Rosedon. One Luca kept on retainer for exactly this kind of situation. They would not be Luca Moretti and Clara Donnelly. They would be Mr. and Mrs. Costello. Investors looking at properties in the county. Their reservations were booked at a nondescript motel 2 towns over from Brenton Hills, a place paid for in cash by a man Nico had never met. Clara was terrified. Her hands shook as she zipped her overnight bag. Luca came up behind her, placing his large, warm hands on her shoulders. She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid, calm presence. "They won't touch you," he murmured into her hair. "They won't even see you until you want to be seen. I will be with you. Every step. You have my word." The drive to Brenton Hills was silent. Clara watched the familiar, green, rolling landscape of her old life pass by, but it looked alien to her now. It was a painting she'd been ripped out of. When they passed the "Welcome to Brenton Hills" sign, her heart began to hammer a painful, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. Luca, sensing her distress, reached across the console and took her hand. He didn't squeeze, he just held it, enveloping her cold, trembling fingers in his own. He drove past the town square, past the diner where she used to get coffee, and then he turned onto her old street. He drove toward the school. "Luca, no," she whispered, her voice choking. "Please, I can't." He pulled the car over to the curb, 100 yards from the familiar brick building, the small playground, the flagpole, the marquee sign that still read, "Go Bobcats." It was all exactly as she'd left it. She could see the window of her old classroom. Her lungs seized. The air in the car felt too thick to breathe. The world tilted, the edges of her vision turning dark and fuzzy. She was back in that office. She was being called a liar. The online comments, the keyed car, the rock through her window, it all came rushing back in a tidal wave of trauma. I can't breathe," she gasped, her hands flying to her throat. "He won. He's in there. I can't. Oh God, I can't. Clara. Clara?" Luca's voice cut through the panic, sharp and commanding. He unbuckled his seatbelt in hers, pulling her across the console and into his lap. He crushed her against his chest, one hand tangling in her hair, forcing her face into the curve of his neck. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You are not there. You are here. You are with me. Feel my hand. Right here, on your back." He pressed his palm flat against her spine. "Feel it? You are safe. That is just a building." He held her tightly, rocking her gently, his other hand stroking her hair. "Breathe with me, in and out. That's it, in and out." He held her for minutes, her sobs muffling against his suit jacket, until the shaking subsided and her breathing evened out. He pulled back, his hands cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that chased away the last of her shadows. "You are stronger than they ever let you be," he said, his voice raw. "You survived. You got out. You are here now. Not because you have to be, in terror, but because you choose to be, in strength. They didn't win. Clara, you did. Now, you just have to finish it." He gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. She nodded, her breath still shaky, and slid back into her own seat. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'm ready." Their first stop was not Thomas Kincaid. It was Kyle Harding. Luca's research showed the boy was not, in fact, at college. The trust fund was empty. Kincaid had lied to him, too. Kyle was working the afternoon shift at a dingy pawn shop on the highway outside of town, a place that smelled of dust and desperation. They walked in together. The bell on the door chimed. Kyle, a thin boy of about 19 with hollow eyes and a bad complexion, looked up from his phone, annoyed. "Help you?" Clara stepped forward. "Hello, Kyle." The boy's face went white. He dropped his phone, and it clattered on the glass counter. Miss Donnelly? What are you doing here?" He looked past her, at the tall, imposing man in the black suit who was standing by the door, blocking the only exit. "I think you know," Clara said, her voice shaking only slightly. She stepped up to the counter. I don't know what you're talking about," Kyle stammered, backing away. "Thomas Kincaid," Luca said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small, cluttered shop. "He promised you a college fund. He lied." Kyle's eyes widened in panic. "Who are you?" "I'm the man who has the bank records," Luca said, walking slowly toward the counter. He was utterly calm. "I have the transfer receipts. I have the emptied trust account. He used you, Kyle. He used you to destroy a good woman's life, and then he threw you away. Just like he threw her away. Just like he'll throw away everyone he touches. I didn't have a choice." Kyle burst out, his voice cracking. "My parents, our house. He was going to take our house. He said he'd ruin us." "And what did he do to me, Kyle?" Clara asked, her voice low and cold. Tears of self-pity and fear welled in the boy's eyes. "He wrote it all. He made me sign it. He said it was just a formality. He said no one would get hurt, that you'd just be transferred. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it would get like that. We know," Clara said, softening slightly. She saw him for what he was. Another victim, weak and easily broken. "I have a document here," Lucas said, placing a legal affidavit on the counter. "It's a full confession. It details Kincaid's coercion. It clears Clara's name completely. You will sign it." "I can't. He'll kill me." Luca leaned in, his forearms resting on the counter. He smiled, but it was a smile that held no warmth at all. If you don't sign it, I will give the evidence of your family's fraudulent mortgage forgiveness to the IRS. You won't go to college, you'll go to prison, along with your parents. If you do sign it..." He pushed a small, expensive-looking audio recorder onto the counter. "You will repeat your confession for this device, and then I will give you a second chance." He slid a card across the counter. "This is an address in Rosedon, a job. It's clean, it's honest, and it's far from here. You will be paid well, and Thomas Kincaid will never, ever find you." Kyle looked from Luca's icy gaze to Clara's steady one. He was trapped. He picked up the pen and, with a shaking hand, he signed the affidavit. "Now," Luca said, pressing the record button, "tell me everything, from the beginning." They left the pawn shop with a signed confession and a full digital recording. One piece of the puzzle was complete. That night, they moved on the second. Kincaid's campaign office was on the second floor of a small building on Main Street. At 2 a.m, the street was dead. Luca, dressed in black, parked in the alley behind it. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her heart pounding. Nico and his partner were in the SUV at the end of the alley, watching the feeds from cameras they had placed earlier. "You stay here," Luca said, turning to Clara. "Lock the doors. I will be back in 10 minutes. "Luca, no," she said, grabbing his arm. "I'm coming with you. Clara, this is not a game. This is breaking and entering. It's my life he stole. Those are my files. I'm not waiting in the car. I'm not a child. I'm going with you." He searched her face, saw the unbending iron in her spine. He nodded. "Once. Stay behind me. Touch nothing." He picked the lock on the back service door in under 15 seconds. The alarm panel beeped, and he entered a code. Nico's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Alarm disabled? You're clean. You have 4 minutes until the next security patrol." They moved up the dark stairs, silent as shadows. The office was decorated with "Kincaid for Mayor" posters, his smiling, predatory face leering at them from every wall. Luca walked directly to Kincaid's private office. He didn't bother with the door. He used a crowbar, and the wood splintered with a single, sharp crack. "His desk," Luca said. "It's in a false bottom drawer." While Clara stood watch at the door, her heart in her throat, Luca pried the drawer open. Inside was a black ledger and a set of files. "We've got it," Luca said into his earpiece. He took the files, then paused. He looked at Kincaid's desk, at the pristine leather blotter and the gaudy gold pen set. He pulled a small, thick card from his own pocket, the same kind he had given Clara. He took Kincaid's gold pen, and in bold, sharp letters, he wrote a single line. He placed the card in the center of the desk, where it could not be missed. "You came after the wrong girl." "Nico," he said, walking out of the office. "We're done here. Reactivate the alarm on our way out." They were back in the car and pulling out of the alley as the town's security patrol car turned onto Main Street, 2 blocks away. They didn't leave town immediately. The next morning, Clara showered and put on a new dress, one he had bought her. She styled her hair. She put on makeup. She looked once again like Clara Donnelly, teacher. But her eyes were different. They were older, harder. "One more stop," she said. She had him take her to the Brenton Hills Diner, the place where her friends had whispered about her, where the waitress had refused to serve her. It was 10 a.m, the mid-morning coffee rush. The bell on the door jingled. Every head in the diner turned. The whispers started instantly. Clara walked in, her head held high. She saw them. The parents from the PDA, her old yoga instructor, the waitress who had sneered at her. She walked to the counter and sat down. Luca Moretti walked in behind her. He was a creature from another, darker, more expensive world. His suit was immaculate, his presence radiating a quiet, lethal authority. The diner fell into a stunned, absolute silence. He stood directly behind Clara's stool. He didn't sit. He just stood, a guardian. He placed one hand on her shoulder, his fingers gently tracing her collarbone, a clear, unmistakable sign of possession. Then he lifted his head and slowly, deliberately, scanned the room. His cold, dark eyes met the gaze of every single person who was staring. He didn't threaten. He didn't speak. He just looked. He dared them. He challenged them to say one word, to even think one whisper. No one moved. No one breathed. The waitress, who had been holding a coffee pot, was frozen. Luca's gaze returned to Clara. He leaned down, his mouth close to her ear, his voice just loud enough for the people at the counter to hear. "What would you like?" "Mia cara." Clara looked at the waitress. "Coffee," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Black." They sat there for 20 minutes. Clara drank her coffee slowly. Luca never moved, his hand a permanent, warm weight on her shoulder. The silence in the diner was absolute, broken only by the sound of her cup clicking against the saucer. When she was finished, Luca placed a $100 bill on the counter. "Keep it," he said. He wrapped his arm fully around her waist and walked her out of the diner. They got into the car, and as they drove away, Clara looked back. The entire diner was still frozen, staring at the door. She had not just cleared her name, she had claimed her power. They hit the highway, leaving Brenton Hills in the rearview mirror. Luca put on some quiet, classical music, and Clara leaned her head against the window. They drove for an hour, the green landscape blurring past. Then, the tension of the last 48 hours, the fear and the adrenaline and the vindication, finally broke. A single tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Soon, she was crying, not with the ragged, terrified sobs of her panic attack, but with a deep, cleansing, quiet grief. She was crying for the woman she had been, for the life she had lost, and for the simple, devastating relief of being clean. Luca pulled the car onto the shoulder of the empty highway. He said nothing. He just unbuckled and pulled her into his arms again, cradling her as she wept into his chest. I thought I'd never feel clean again," she whispered, her voice thick. "I thought I'd always be... that lie?" He held her tighter, his hand stroking her hair. He kissed her forehead, his lips pressing gently against her skin. "You were never the lie, Clara," he murmured. "You were the truth. They just couldn't handle it." He held her until she was finished, a silent protector on the side of an empty road, as she finally, truly, let her old life go. The return to Roston was quiet. The manic, desperate energy of Brenton Hills faded, replaced by the penthouse's calm, sunlit silence. But the air was different. The black ledger and the audio file sat on Luca's desk in his home office. A bomb waiting to be detonated. Clara watched him that evening as he made a single phone call. He stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in the dark glass, his voice too low for her to hear the words, only the cadence. It was calm, precise, and absolute. He was giving orders. "Who was that?" she asked after he hung up. "A man who owes me," Luca said, turning to her. "His name is David Shaw. He's a reporter for the Roston Chronicle, but he's syndicated nationally. He values a good story more than he values his own safety, which makes him useful, and he despises corrupt politicians. So, it's done? He's sending a team to Brenton Hills tomorrow to corroborate the evidence we gave him," Luca said. "The student's confession, the bank records, the original audio of Kincaid's bribe. The story will run in 2 days." And it did. It didn't just run, it exploded. It was the lead story on the national wire. Small-town mayoral candidate implodes in corruption scandal. Teacher framed. The story had everything: sex, power, coercion, and a digital trail of irrefutable proof. Thomas Kincaid's smiling, confident face was plastered everywhere, next to screenshots of his own typed out. Fraudulent messages. By noon. Kincaid had withdrawn from the race. By 4 o'clock. The state's attorney general had announced a full-scale criminal investigation. Clara watched it all from the safety of the penthouse. A strange, hollow feeling in her chest. It was over. She was vindicated. Her name was clean. The next morning, her phone rang. It was a number she recognized, one she thought she had deleted, Brenton Hills Elementary. She let it ring 4 times, then answered, her voice steady. "Hello? Clara? Clara, oh, thank God. It's Mark Henderson." The principal's voice was a slick, pathetic blend of relief and manufactured warmth. Did you see the news? It's horrific. What that man did, the school board, we are just appalled. We are so sorry for what you were put through. Clara said nothing. She just listened. We held an emergency meeting this morning, Henderson continued, his voice bright with false cheer. The board has voted unanimously. Your position, Clara. It's yours. We want you back. We need you back. The classroom misses you. We all do. Clara looked out the window at the vast, sprawling, indifferent city of Roseton. She thought of her old classroom, her old life. She thought of the whispers in the diner, of Henderson polishing his glasses, of her eviction notice. No, she said. The silence on the other end was absolute. What do you mean, no? I mean, no, thank you. Mark, I won't be coming back. But this is your life, your job. Your name is cleared. You're right, Clara said, and her voice was cold, sharp, and new. My name is cleared, but I'm not the same girl you threw away. Mark, you didn't just place me on leave. You signed the letter. You stood by while my life was torn apart because you were afraid of Thomas Kincaid. You didn't believe me when it mattered. You only believed the news. Clara, that's not fair. No, she said, cutting him off. What wasn't fair was me, calling you, begging you to just listen. I have a new life now. Goodbye, Mark. She hung up the phone. She felt a fierce, burning satisfaction. She was not disposable, and she was never going back. But the victory was hollowed by a new restlessness. She wasn't a victim anymore. But what was she? She wasn't Luca's prisoner, but she wasn't independent. She was the caretaker of a penthouse, a woman kept safe by a man of terrifying power. She read books, she went for walks, but she had no purpose. She found it by accident. She was walking with Luca one evening through his old neighborhood, the one with the Café Russo. Tucked between a bakery and a butcher shop was a simple storefront, the Moretti Community Center. Inside, the lights were bright, the walls covered in children's artwork. It was loud, chaotic, and wonderful. Kids were doing homework, playing chess, and arguing over a basketball. What is this place? She asked him. My mother started it, he said, his voice holding that rare, soft tone it only did when he spoke of her. It's an after-school program. Keeps kids off the street, gives them a place to go, a hot meal. My organization funds it, quietly. A young woman rushed up to them. Mr. Moretti, good to see you. We've got a problem with the algebra kids. Mr. Antonio is out with the flu, and I can't make heads or tails of this quadratic equation. Before Luca could answer, Clara stepped forward. Quadratic equations? I can help. I used to. I'm a teacher. She spent the next 2 hours at a Formica table, surrounded by teenagers, a pencil tucked behind her ear, her hands covered in whiteboard marker. She was patient, she was funny, and she was brilliant. She was in her element. She began tutoring there 3 days a week, then 4, the kids. At first wary of the beautiful, quiet woman who came with the boss, quickly grew to adore her. She wasn't just Mr. Moretti's girl. She was Miss Clara. The neighborhood families, the mothers and fathers who worked in Luca's unions and restaurants, began to nod to her on the street. They brought her espresso. They offered her fresh bread from the bakery. She had a name. She had a place. She was, for the first time, building something of her own. Luca watched this transformation with a quiet, guarded pride, but his world was shifting. We have a problem, Nico said, standing in Luca's office above the Café Russo. It's Romescu. Luca stilled. Victor Romescu was a different breed, not old-school honor like Luca's family, but a new, brutal wave of Eastern European organized crime. Romescu was loud, he was violent, and he saw Luca's quiet, discreet empire as old and weak. What about him? Luca asked. He's pushing on the docks, but that's not it. He's been asking questions. Nico slid a small, grainy surveillance photo across the desk. It was Clara. She was walking out of the community center, laughing, holding a drawing from one of the children. He knows about her, Nico said, his voice grim. He's been watching the center. He's talking. Luca. Telling his men that the great Luca Moretti, The man who doesn't trust anyone has finally found a weakness. He's calling her your weak point. Luca's face turned to stone. The scar over his eyebrow went white. The last time someone had underestimated him, it had cost him his brother. The last time he had trusted, it had cost him his father. And now, the one person he had let in was a target. "Double the protection on the center," Luca ordered, his voice a low, lethal growl. "I want eyes on her every second. He doesn't get near her." But Romescu was faster than he thought. 2 days later, Clara left the center just after dark. The street was busy, families walking home, the smell of garlic in the air. She was walking the 4 blocks to the car Luca insisted she take, which was parked in a secure garage. A black Mercedes, not one of Luca's cars, slowed beside her. The tinted window slid down. She didn't recognize the man inside, but his smile was all teeth. "Miss Clara," he said, his accent thick. "Such a good teacher, my boss. Mr. Romescu. He admires your work." He admires a man who has such beautiful vulnerabilities. He didn't threaten her. He didn't have to. He just looked at her, his eyes cold and dead. "He says to tell Mr. Moretti," the man continued, his smile widening, "that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link." The car sped off, its tires squealing on the cobblestones. Clara stood frozen on the sidewalk, the child's drawing crushed in her hand. Her heart was hammering, but it was a different fear. It wasn't the panic of Brenton Hills. It was the cold, sharp realization that her life was now tied to his, and the danger was real. When Luca's driver arrived, she was pale but composed. She got in the car. "Take me to Luca," she said. "Not the penthouse. His office." She told him what happened. She watched his face go from cold anger to a still, white-hot rage she had never seen. He didn't speak. He just stood, his back to her, looking out his office window. When he turned around, his expression was shut down, his eyes hard and remote. He was the man she had met in the club, a stranger. "It's over," he said. "What's over?" "The community center. Your walks, this." He made a vague gesture. "You're moving back to the penthouse. Tonight, I'm putting a full-time detail on the elevator. No one gets in or out without my authorization. You will not leave the apartment." A cold dread, worse than the fear from the man in the car, washed over her. "What?" "Luca, no, you can't." "I can," he said, his voice flat. "This isn't Brenton Hills. Clara, this isn't a schoolyard bully. This is a man who will put a bullet in your head to see if I flinch. You are done tutoring. You are done walking. You are going to be safe." He was locking her up. He was putting her in a glass cage. All the old terror, the feeling of being disposable, of having her life taken away, rushed back. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "He wins. If you do that, Romescu wins. He'll have taken me from you without even touching me. I don't care about winning," Luca snapped, his control breaking. "I care about you breathing. Do you understand what he is? Do you know what he will do to you? And do you understand what you're doing?" she shot back, her voice rising, tears of rage and frustration burning in her eyes. "You're treating me like a possession, like a thing to be locked away. I am not your weak point, Luca. I am not a thing, I am a person. You are the only person," he roared, grabbing her arms, his fingers digging into her skin. He wasn't trying to hurt her, but his terror and his strength were overwhelming. "You are the only thing I have not burned to the ground, and I will not lose you. By burying me," she cried, struggling against his grip. "By turning me back into the woman I was, the one who hides, the one who's afraid. If I run now, Luca, if I let you hide me, I will never stop running. I will be his victim, and I will be yours." The word victim struck him like a physical blow. He released her as if she had burned him. Stumbling back, he looked at his own hands, horrified. He saw the marks his grip had left on her arms. He looked at her, and his mask of rage shattered, revealing the raw, unadulterated terror beneath. It was the same fear he'd had on the rooftop, the fear of destroying the one good thing he had. "Clara," he whispered, his voice broken. But the dam of their fear and frustration had broken. The argument was over, and the raw, desperate need that simmered beneath it took over. She didn't back away. She surged forward, grabbing the lapels of his suit jacket. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice a low, trembling sob. "Don't you dare treat me like I'm fragile." She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was an assault. It was angry and desperate and full of teeth and pain. It was a fight. He responded instantly, his mouth crushing hers, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, lifting her off the floor and slamming her back against the hard wood of his desk. Papers and a lamp clattered to the floor. It was a collision, a desperate, frantic need to erase the argument, to erase Romescu, to erase everything but the two of them. His hands were in her hair, tugging her head back. Her hands were tearing at his tie, at the buttons of his shirt. It was not tender, it was urgent. It was the animal panic of two people who had almost lost everything and were now clinging to each other. He tore at the layers of her clothes, his breath hot and ragged against her neck. She raked her nails down his back, a silent, primal scream. This was not lovemaking. It was an affirmation of life. It was a desperate, breathless, physical statement. "You are here. You are mine. You are alive." He held her pinned against the desk, their bodies slick and their breathing harsh. He looked into her eyes, and the desperation there matched his own. There was no dominance. Only a raw, shared need. It was a frantic, unhurried rush, a demand for connection, for the intimacy that proved they were more than just a boss and his weakness. Afterward, they didn't move. They stayed tangled, their hearts hammering in the sudden, deafening quiet of the office. He was still buried inside her, his forehead pressed to hers, his large body trembling. "You gave me everything back," she whispered, her voice rough, her hands cupping his jaw, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were clear, bright with tears, but unyielding. "You gave me my name. You gave me my strength. You gave me... me. But it only matters. It only counts. If I can choose what to do with it." She stroked the scar on his eyebrow. "Don't you take that choice away from me, Luca. Don't you dare." He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the woman who had faced down Kyle Harding, who had walked into that diner, who had started a new life from the ashes of her old one. She was not a weak point. She was a pillar of iron. He finally understood. To protect her, he had to trust her. The one thing he had sworn never to do again. He slowly, gently, pulled away, helping her adjust her clothes, his movements now tender, full of regret for his harshness. He picked up his jacket from the floor and wrapped it around her shoulders. He stood before her, his armor back in place, but his eyes were open, his decision made. "All right," he said, his voice quiet. "You go to the center. You live your life. You make your choice." She smiled, a wobbly, relieved smile. "Thank you." "But Clara," he said, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, cold promise. He cupped her face, his thumbs strogas his promise. "He will not have an army. He will have me. And I will burn the city to the ground before I let them touch you." Luca's promise was a double-edged sword. Clara could live her life, but she would live it in a gilded cage of his protection. She went to the community center, but she no longer walked. A black armored sedan, indistinguishable from Luca's own, picked her up and dropped her off. Two men, quiet and polite but with the hard eyes of his organization, followed her. One stayed by the door of the center, the other patrolled the street. Clara hated it. The children noticed. The parents were warier. She felt like a target, and the protection only seemed to paint a brighter bullseye on her back. 3 days after the confrontation in Luca's office, she was leaving the center. It was dusk, the sky a deep, bruised purple. She said goodnight to the men at the door and walked to the waiting sedan. Her driver, a young man named Matteo, opened the back door for her. She was just sliding onto the leather seat when it happened. It was not a flashy attack. It was brutally professional. A heavy-duty construction truck, its lights off, barreled through the red light at the intersection and T-boned the sedan at over 50 miles per hour. The sound was a deafening shriek of metal, a percussive, explosive thud that seemed to stop the air in Clara's lungs. She was thrown violently against the far door, her head cracking against the reinforced glass. The world spun. Alarms blared. Outside, she heard shouting. The two men who had been her guards were already moving, drawing weapons, but the truck's doors flew open. 4 men dressed in black, carrying weapons, emerged. Matteo, the driver, was groaning. He had a severe gash on his forehead. He turned, his eyes wild with adrenaline and pain. He grabbed Clara's shoulder. "Go! Now!" He didn't try to get out his side. He knew protocol. This was the inside intel Luca had drilled into all of them. This car was a sacrifice. He unlatched her door, which was miraculously undamaged, and shoved her. "The bakery!" he yelled, pulling his own weapon. "Go!" Clara fell out onto the cobblestones, her knee scraping, her ears ringing. She saw one of her guards go down. She saw the men from the truck advancing. She ran. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the Café Russo, which was just 2 doors down from the bakery. The street was in chaos. People were screaming. She didn't look back. She ran with the same desperate, primal terror she'd felt in Brenton Hills, but this time, she wasn't running from. She was running to... She slammed through the door of the bakery, a tiny shop next to the cafe. The old woman behind the counter screamed. "Back room!" Clara yelled, vaulting the counter. "He sent me!" She burst through the swinging doors into the hot, flour-dusted kitchen, past the cooling racks of bread, and slammed her hand against a steel panel on the back wall. It looked like a walk-in freezer. It was a reinforced, hidden door. It opened into a narrow, dark passageway that connected to the cafe's basement. She fell into the passage just as the front of the bakery exploded in gunfire. The steel door slammed shut, its heavy locks clicking into place. She was safe. She was in Luca's world, inside his walls. She collapsed against the cold concrete, hyperventilating, safe and utterly, completely trapped. Nico found her there 2 minutes later. He pulled her to her feet. "Come," was all he said. He took her to the penthouse. The building was in lockdown. When the elevator doors opened, Luca was standing there. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in black pants and a dark t-shirt. He looked at her, his eyes scanning her in a frantic, terrifying assessment. He saw the scrape on her knee, the blood on her temple, the dust on her coat. He saw her, terrified but whole, alive. His face, which had been pale with a terror she had never seen, hardened. The terror didn't vanish. It calcified. It turned into something else. It turned into a rage so cold and so still it sucked the warmth from the room. This was the man who had torn down Thomas Kincaid. This was the man who had confronted Sal. This was the Moretti boss, the man everyone feared. "Nico," Luca said, his voice a low, perfectly calm growl. "She is not to leave this room. Put the entire building on lockdown. No one in or out." He turned to Clara. He touched her face, his thumb gently wiping the blood from her temple. His hand was shaking. "You are safe," he whispered. "Luca, Matteo, the guards. My men will handle it," he said, his voice dropping. "This is over. He touched you. He crossed the line." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, terrified of the answer. He kissed her forehead. A chaste, cold, final kiss. "I'm going to end it. I'm going to burn his city down." He walked past her to his study. She watched him unlock a case. He was checking a weapon. He was pulling on a black tactical vest. He was not a businessman anymore. He was a soldier. He was going to war. He left her. The elevator doors slid shut, and she was alone with Nico and 2 other guards who had materialized in the apartment. "Where did he go?" she demanded of Nico. Nico was setting up a laptop on the coffee table. He plugged in 3 different hard drives. "He's gone to pull the root, Romescu's entire operation. It's housed in a warehouse district by the docks. All his product, his money, his servers. Luca has an inside man, the same one who warned us about the ambush tonight. He's going alone?" "He's not alone," Nico said. He gestured to the screen, which flickered to life. It was a mosaic of grainy, black and white video feeds, 4, 5, 6 different angles, a loading dock, a dark corridor, A computer server room. "What is this?" Clara whispered, her hand over her mouth. "The boss's inside man. He gave us the security feeds," Nico said. "Luca wanted you to see. He wanted you to know, when it was over, that it was truly over." Clara sat on the sofa, pulling a blanket around her. She was watching a live feed of a tactical raid, her raid. She watched as a dark van, silent and lightless, rolled up to the loading dock. 10 men, all in black, poured out. They moved with the silent, terrifying precision she had seen in the alley behind the diner. But this was different. This was an invasion. Luca was at the front. He moved with a grace that was almost liquid, a shadow among shadows. They breached the door. The feeds inside the warehouse exploded with motion, shouting, men scrambling, but there was no gunfire. Not yet. Luca's team was not a kill squad. They were a dismantling crew. They used zip ties, tasers, and brutal, efficient, close quarters combat. They were not there to murder, they were there to break. They moved from room to room, subduing Romescu's guards, stacking them, tying them. The main feed settled on the central warehouse floor. This was where the confrontation happened. Luca, flanked by his men, cornered the last of Victor's lieutenants. It was brutal. It was fast. It was an overwhelming show of force. Clara watched, her heart in her throat. This was the man she loved. This was the violence that kept her safe. She saw him gesture. His men began pouring gasoline on crates. They smashed servers with sledgehammers. They were erasing Victor Romescu. Then a feed from a side corridor flickered. A man, Victor himself, was trying to escape. He fired a single, wild shot back into the warehouse, on the main screen. Clara saw Luca spin. He didn't go down, but he stumbled, grabbing his side. He recovered instantly, motioning 2 of his men to pursue, but he was hurt. Clara's breath hitched. A small, choked sob escaped her. "He's hit," she whispered, her fingers pressing against the cold screen. "Luca, oh God." She watched for another 30 minutes, her body rigid. As Luca's men finished the job, they set the charges. They herded the captured men into a shipping container to await the police, who would be called in with an anonymous tip. And then she watched Luca walk out. He was limping, one arm pressed hard against his side. The warehouse erupted in a series of muffled, contained explosions behind him. The feeds went dead. Nico let out a long, slow breath. "It's done." The penthouse was silent for the next hour. Clara just sat, staring at the blank screen, shaking. She didn't know if he was alive, if he was in a hospital, if he was bleeding out in the back of a van. The silence was a new, suffocating kind of torture. The elevator chimed, the doors opened. Luca fell into the room. He was still in his black gear, slick with sweat and grime. His vest was off, his left side. From his ribs to his hip was a solid, wet mass of dark blood. He was pale, his face grim with pain, but he was on his feet. "It's done," he breathed, his voice a ragged gasp. He collapsed onto the long, white sofa, staining the expensive fabric. Clara was moving before he even landed. The shock, the fear, it all evaporated, replaced by a sharp, focused, desperate need. "Nico, the medical kit," she ordered, her voice the voice of a teacher, the voice of command. "Now." She knelt in front of him, her hands hovering, terrified to touch him. "Luca, oh God, Luca, it's just a graze," he grunted, his eyes closing. The bullet, ricocheted, shrapnel. Nico was there with a heavy, professional-grade trauma kit. Clara ripped it open. She saw gauze, antiseptic, and a sterile suture kit. "Get me towels and whiskey," she said, her voice not shaking. Her hands, however, were... She cut away the fabric of his shirt. It was a deep, ugly, 6-inch gash, bleeding profusely, but it looked clean. It hadn't hit anything vital. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, pouring the antiseptic directly into the wound. Luca roared, his whole body arching off the sofa, his hand grabbing her wrist with crushing strength, but he didn't stop her. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't make a sound. She cleaned the wound, her hands moving with a sureness she didn't know she possessed. She threaded the needle. "Hold him," She told Nico, "I don't need—" Luca started. "Shut up, Luca!" She sobbed, her voice breaking. She cupped his jaw, her other hand holding the needle. She looked him in the eye, her tears dripping onto his face. "You stupid, arrogant, brave man. You come back to me. You hear me? You stay with me." She put the first stitch in. His entire body went rigid, a low groan tearing from his throat, but his eyes never left hers. She stitched him up, her hands trembling, her tears blinding her, her entire being focused on this one task, closing the wound, keeping him whole. When she was done, she wrapped his torso in thick bandages. Her hands were covered in his blood. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. He was exhausted, pale, but his eyes were clear. He was watching her. Nico and the other guard helped him to the bedroom. Clara cleaned herself, her mind numb, and then went to him. He was lying in the bed, the white sheets a stark contrast to his bruised, bandaged body. She slid in beside him, curling herself against his uninjured side. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, hissing in pain as he moved. She laid her head on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart, feeling the steady, strong beat. They said nothing. There was no sex. There was no passion. It was something far deeper. It was the silent, solemn vow of two souls who had just walked through fire and found each other on the other side. It was the stillness of the survivor. It was the shared breath, his chest rising and falling under her ear, her breath matching his. It was protection. It was reverence. It was the unspoken promise in the dark that they would never, ever be alone again. A week passed. The city was quiet. Victor Romescu had vanished. His empire was in ashes. His men scattered or arrested. The threat was gone. Luca's side was healing, the stitches holding. The penthouse, which had been a fortress, was once again just a home. That night, Luca took her hand. He was dressed, as he always was, in a dark suit. He looked at her, his face serious. "Come with me," he said. He took her to the rooftop, his mother's garden. The night was clear, the stars bright, the city a glittering jewel below them. The air was cool, and the fountain bubbled, a peaceful, constant sound. He walked to the edge, looking down at the city he owned. "It's over," he said, his voice quiet. "Kincaid is facing indictment. Romescu is gone. You're safe. Your name is cleared. You are free, Clara." He turned to her. His face, in the starlight, was unguarded. He looked afraid. That same fear she had seen on this very roof, the fear of being vulnerable. "You can go," he said, his voice rough. "You never asked for this. This world, my world, it's violent. It's dark. You don't belong in it." He took a deep breath. "I've arranged for funds, a new name, a new life. Anywhere in the world you want to go. You can be a teacher. You can be normal. You can leave. No one will ever stop you. I will not stop you." He was offering her the one thing no one ever had, a choice, a clean, total, unconditional escape. Clara looked at him, at this powerful, broken, beautiful man who was willing to let her go, who was willing to be alone again, just to see her safe. She walked toward him, stopping just inches from him. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I spent my whole life being saved," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I was saved by my books. I was saved by my job. And then you saved me." She reached up and placed her palm on his chest, directly over his heart. She felt it beat, strong and steady. "I don't want to be saved anymore, Luca," she whispered, looking into his dark, searching eyes. "I want to build something, beside you." He closed his eyes, his breath shuddering out of him, as if he had been holding it for a lifetime. He leaned his forehead against hers. "Clara," he breathed, his voice breaking. "I'm not leaving," she said. "This is my home. You are my home." The final scene came 3 months later. The winter cold had broken, and a weak spring sun was warming the streets of Roseton's old neighborhood. Clara was standing on a familiar sidewalk. The Moretti Community Center was bustling, but next to it, where a derelict old laundromat had been, was a brand new building. It was all new, brick and shining, floor-to-ceiling glass. A man on a ladder was hanging a simple, elegant sign. It read, "The Donnelly Education Center." The doors of the new center burst open, and a flood of children, laughing and shouting, ran out into the sunlight. They were the children she had tutored, the children of the neighborhood. "Bye, Miss Clara," a little girl yelled, waving. "See you tomorrow, Miss Clara." She waved back, her throat tight, a smile so wide it hurt her face. She was crying, but they were not tears of pain, or fear, or even relief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was hers. This was what she had built. She turned, wiping her eyes, and she looked across the street. He was there. He was standing in the shadows of an alcove, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his long, black coat. He was watching her, as he always did. The silent guardian, the shadow that kept her safe. She didn't wait. She didn't wave. She ran. She ran across the street, dodging a taxi, her heart pounding. She saw him see her coming. He didn't move from his spot, but she saw it, the almost imperceptible softening of his face, his eyes, his mouth. The way his entire hard, unyielding presence seemed to gentle, just for her. She slammed into his chest, her arms wrapping around his neck, burying her face in the cold wool of his coat. He grunted, his arms coming around her, holding her so tightly it almost hurt, a solid, grounding, immovable force. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. She grabbed his hand, her fingers lacing with his, a perfect fit. "You didn't just give it all back," she whispered, her voice choked with a love so big it filled her lungs. "You gave me something I never had." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so grateful to have you here. Please, take a moment to comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. And finally, let us know your thoughts on Clara and Luca's journey in the comments. We read every one. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.